You're about to hear a brief conversation with an incredible artist. Part autobiographical journey, part literary analysis, and part late-night chat in the theatre bar. This is Hear Me Out.
And I'm your host, Lucy Eaton. Please welcome to the stage, Toby Stephens. I see you have a pen in your pocket, Toby. Are you just ready to take notes?
That is like the bookshelf in the background of your thing. It's a total pose. I'm actually surrounded by boxes because we've just had our house refurbished. I'm literally in this box room which is upstairs.
Brilliant.
But anyway, I mean, eventually it'll be cleared out and it'll be a place for me to go and write with my pen.
Get that pen out and do some writing.
Doodle with my pen.
Oh,
yeah.
I am such a serial doodler when I'm on phone conversations. I mean, I wouldn't do it on this type of conversation because I can see your face and you can see mine, and it would be very rude if I was But on the phone, I do lots of squiggles and flowers, and I'm like a little teenage girl, lots of hearts, stars. I just can't stop. I'm sure that says something about my psyche. Okay, so come on. We must now be very serious and tell me what the speech is that you have picked as your favourite speech, Toby.
So my speech that I've chosen is from Macbeth, and it's a very famous speech, but it's the one where he sees the dagger. I saw Macbeth. It was one of the first Shakespeare plays I saw as a child.
Right.
I must have been about 5 or 6 when I first saw it. I think about 6.
It's a good one for kids.
Yeah, and I was entranced by it. It's such a brilliant play. It's very pithy. It's not a very long play.
No.
And it packs such a punch.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this speech sort of sums up everything that I love about the play, because it's right at the heart of the play. It's just before Macbeth kills Duncan, and it's this moment of silence, this pause while he's waiting for the bell to toll, which is his signal to go and do it. And he sees this dagger, and the questions that are asked in it is, is it some apparition? Is it part of the witch's this whole mystic side to the play? Or is it his conscience? Is it a manifestation of his conscience? And Shakespeare is deliberately ambiguous about this, I think, throughout the whole play.
I'd never thought of that before, what you just said, in terms of there's 2 versions of not a real dagger that it could be. In my mind, I was like, well, we know it's not a real dagger. But you're right, there's is it a real hallucination, as in something created by the magic, created by the witches? Or is it a completely unreal hallucination, as in something of his mind?
Yeah, and I sort of, my thing is I think that Shakespeare is deliberately ambiguous about it, and it's kind of both. He straddles both horses, because there is a feeling that the play is couched in this world which is pagan, that there's very little Christian narrative or symbolism in the play. I mean, he doesn't really. It's very much a kind of pagan world, and the witches are these fate-like characters from Greek myth.
Yes,
and they're very much based on that, and so this sense of that there is this kind of predestined thing that his fate has already been predetermined. So whether he has free will or not. Does Macbeth have free will? And it seems that he doesn't, because he's drawn along this path that has already been created for him. But at the same time, he still does have consciousness, and he does have a conscience.
Yes.
And that is to me, is the tragic nature of every tragedy, and every tragic character has to have a tragic flaw. And his tragic flaw is the fact that he is not necessarily in control of what is going on.
I like that. Yes, his tragic flaw is out of himself.
Yes, and at the same time, he is aware of what he is doing.
Yes.
So he's caught in this terrible situation where he is drawn along this inevitable path, but at the same time, his conscience is engaged. He knows what the consequences are.
Yes, he's sort of full of regret as he's doing it.
Yes.
It's really funny when you say about it being really ambiguous, because certainly with Shakespeare, we do get used to thinking like, oh, there's an answer for that. Like, I can translate this and then I will understand it. And there is something really exciting about there being a character where it's like, no amount of translation can solve this.
Yeah.
You make up your own mind.
I think that's where theatre and poetry are so much more profound than something that's very literal. It engages a part of the mind or confuses the mind in a way that actually opens up more possibilities. If you deliberately make it ambiguous, if it's poetic ambiguity, it elicits an audience to ask all these questions, and opens up the situation to interpretation. And I think that that's much more interesting. And I think it is a very deliberate thing that Shakespeare does with it.
Yes, I get very frustrated in the theatre when I am told stuff too much, when I'm treated like I'm stupid. You know, there's an element of like, I want to work.
Well, it suddenly makes it so boring, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's sort of prosaic. You know, you go, oh, right, okay. And when something is theatrical, it is so different from, like, reading a book, watching a TV series, watching a movie, reading a newspaper article. It is something that, it is a world that is created that allows the imagination to engage and allows us to ask these questions that are asked are things that we have to ask of ourselves, you know, and I think that's always been its function. You know, the Greek, way back in the Greek times, where it was almost like a religious thing.
Yes.
One had to ask oneself these questions.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, certainly with Macbeth, there's a lot of really important questions. Otherwise, why do we still do it? Why are we still fascinated with this play? I mean, I think, and why are we still fascinated by Shakespeare? Because I think he really does tap into something about the human condition and ask these questions that are kind of eternal.
We know he was very popular in his time, but I wonder whether he's gained popularity for us because it comes back to what I was saying about translating. There's an added layer of ambiguity when it's not immediately our modern language. And there's an added layer where sometimes you read stuff and, like you say about poetry, it's a bit like art. You know, like two different people can see the same piece of art and take a very different thing from it. And I think when you're dealing with language that is A, very poetic anyway, and B, speaking in a language or a time that we don't necessarily speak anymore, where we don't necessarily use words in the same way anymore, it almost adds an extra layer of you take from it what you want. I sort of wonder whether he's obviously more popular now than he was then because he's got centuries of history behind him as well, but whether there's more we're getting out of him than even contemporary, you know, Elizabethans were getting out of him.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably right. And I mean, I think he was writing very quickly. I think he was writing for an audience. He was writing stuff that was gonna please get bums on seats. I mean, there was a whole commercial aspect to this. So, you know, it was quite mercenary in a way.
We're like, what made him pick that word?
Yeah.
And he's like, first word that came to my head.
Yeah, and also it was a time where language, I mean, look, I'm not an academic, but I do know that this was a time where language was still very much in flux, and it was still being he invented a lot of this stuff, a lot of this language. It was like sort of painting, you know. They were creating things, you know. It was incredibly creative, and it was very plastic, you know. He could sculpt it how he wanted it.
Yeah.
We can't really do that now because we're sort of lumbered with grammar and tenses and, like, you know, all of this stuff that was put on later. But at the time, he was just going, oh yeah, I'll just jam along, you know, put stuff in here.
I read something earlier that was about this. Which line is it? I've got it here. Words to the heat of deeds, too cold breath gives. That it's like, words gives is grammatically incorrect.
Totally.
But give a shit.
Yeah. It's like,
you know, it's like,
and also, how does the brain operate? You know, soliloquies are, you know, they are somebody alone processing something.
Yeah. And
all of his soliloquies are great because they move things forward. You know, I think there's a sort of misapprehension that, it's a bit where somebody comes on and they noodles. They do a bit of kind of navel gazing.
Yeah.
It's actually an active thing. It's like, I mean, it is a moment of quiet that he has, but it does move the whole thing forward, and it reveals something that's going on inside the character.
I don't know Macbeth well enough, but is it that he knows at the beginning of this speech he's going to kill Duncan, or is he deciding whether he's going to kill Duncan within this speech?
I think he knows he's going to do it. There seems to be this inevitability toward it. But the thing is, initially the dagger presents itself as this clean dagger that's like, it's almost like in one of those video games. It's like pointing the way. Where where am I going? Oh, I'm going in there. It's like sort of Call of Duty or something. You know?
Yeah.
But it's like this. It's a manifestation of this clean dagger that's pointing the way to Duncan. Mm. And to me, it sort of seems like it is part of this kind of thread that he's going along, the fatal thread that he's following.
Yeah, yeah.
But then at some point it turns, and then it's got blood all over it. It's dripping with blood. And I think that change to me, it almost seems like Macbeth is taking that step forward. It's showing him what this action is going to do. It is murder. To me, it seems there are two sort of functions of the speech. The one is to present the audience with what the dagger is, what he is going to kill Duncan with. And it also describes, in a way, what is to come. What am I doing? Am I in charge of this, or is it in charge of me? That seems to be the first thing, is discussing. Then the second half of it sets the scene. It's at a time where Shakespeare was writing, there wasn't lighting and effects, there wasn't dry ice coming on, like we can do now, really cool lighting and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's this wonderful language that he creates, he sets the stage. I mean, in fact, it refers to the Rape of Lucrece. There's a passage in the Rape of Lucrece with Tarquin's ravishing strides.
So can you just fill in for the listener what the Rape of Lucrece is?
The Rape of Lucrece is an epic poem that Shakespeare wrote. He did this sort of side industry of writing very long poems, beautiful poems that are entirely separate from his dramatic work, but are incredible, actually. I mean, obviously the sonnets are very famous. But the Rape of Lucrece is this fantastic epic poem, and anyway, so he references his own poem really with the section where he's talking about Tarquin's ravishing, where Tarquin gets up in the night and he creeps. It is again, it's this thing of a man seemingly irrevocably set upon this pathway that he can't get off. And him creeping towards, but at the same time knowing what he's going to do and thinking about what he's doing, but yet he cannot stop himself. And I think that is very much part of this play. And it's not excusing Macbeth. It's just saying that Shakespeare is trying to understand these desires, these darker desires that we have that control us. They seem to control us. And Shakespeare is saying, is it some mystic? It's like some kind of mystic thing that we can't. We're on this. We are being drawn along by this cord that we don't understand. And this is also written in the time prior to any sort of understanding of psychology.
Yeah, of course.
Hamlet, for example, is always seen in the prism of modern psychology, but they didn't understand what psychology was back then. I mean, they had no idea. Hamlet is a religious play, essentially. It is somebody who is a Protestant, who has been schooled in Protestantism, who sees a Catholic ghost. And what does that do to your whole sense of the world?
Yeah. Well, I don't know who this one was written under James I, and I don't know what he was.
Very Protestant.
He was very Protestant.
Very, very. Yeah.
But I know that there was the whole, this was partly for him because he was fascinated by witches. So it was sort of written for him as almost like a commission. He's like, I want a witch play.
And it is. I mean, it still has this great draw because every time you do it, it's like, ooh, it's Macbeth. It's whatever, you know, very creepy.
Yeah, double, toil and trouble.
Yeah, and there's all of this bad luck attached to it, and kind of these myths that legends that go around it.
And it is, it's just a good ghost story, isn't it? Like, I think when you say it was the first Shakespeare play that you remember sort of seeing and loving, I do think it makes a lot of sense. It's like A Midsummer Night's Dream, actually. Even though this is a tragedy, it's like, those are the two that I always think they're good gateway drugs to Shakespeare for kids. Like you say, it's pithy, but it's like so much happens and it's almost like a fairy tale, like a dark, dark fairy tale.
Totally.
I always think particularly with Shakespeare or with Jacobean stuff, just with anything not super contemporary, there's a lot that goes over an audience's head that an actor would love, relish, you know, moments that when you're just hearing it for the first time pass you by. Is there a moment in this that you think, if an audience were just watching Macbeth, it would go over their heads, but you're like, you've got to hear this line, or you've got to realise what this line is saying?
I think the second half of the speech, to me, is beautiful, and very much like you said with Midsummer Night's Dream, which I think is actually an apt thing to compare it to, because some of the poetry, the poetry is ravishing. And for me, the second half of the speech, where he talks about... Now o'er the one half world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings, and withered murder alarmed by his sentinel the wolf, whose howl his watch, thus with stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides towards his design like a ghost, moves like a ghost, is such a wonderful... I mean, as I say, he's setting the scene. He's setting, like, I'm doing this at night, and these things happen at night. And, like, referencing the wolves, and the way that they move, the stealth. And it's also enacting what he's doing. He's creeping toward this chamber. You know, like this, and again, calling on, like, a ghost.
Yeah.
And I love the kind of... wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep. You know, like this time is where our minds, when we are asleep, we create these terrible dreams, these visions. This is this kind of half world where anything can happen.
Yeah, and Duncan is murdered in his sleep. It's like sleep is not a safe, sacred place in Macbeth.
Which is deeply unsettling. You know, it's like you suddenly putting that in there, like going, God, even when you're asleep, are people creeping around who could kill you? You know.
Yeah, or your nightmares are going to get you. Like, the whole thing is just, unsettling. Who played the Macbeth when you first saw it? Do you remember?
I do. I remember vividly. I saw it. My mother is an actress, and she was performing at a festival theatre in Canada. We moved there for about 4 years in the end, and it was the Stratford Festival Theatre there, and they did Shakespeare, and it was a wonderful... He was British originally, but moved to the States and Canada. Actor called Brian Bedford. He was a really, really wonderful actor, and he did a lot of plays with my mum, and my mum played Lady Macbeth in this production.
Brilliant.
And he played Macbeth. And I remember it. He was a fantastic actor, and even though I was a child and I didn't understand everything, I completely followed what was going on. I followed the main narrative.
It was made really crystal clear.
Oh, totally crystal clear. And I always remember the bit with Banquo, because they had this. It was great. They had this whole scene with people milling around the table. There were loads of actors all like milling around the table, celebrating. And there was suddenly this moment where it went to blackout, and there were just two spots, and there was one on Macbeth and one on Banquo, and you hadn't noticed him. He was just there in the crowd, and it was like bam, and then suddenly he's there, and you're like, oh my God, you know. And it was this electric moment, and. Yeah. You know, that's what's so great about the play. It was so simple. It was done in a very simple... There wasn't dry ice and flying witches. It was just done in this very, very simple way. Because actually you don't need much. It's so much done in the language.
Yeah.
And the whole ambience is set up in this world very carefully by Shakespeare and the way that he does things and the language he uses.
When I went to university, I did Macbeth as my first play.
Right.
And it was... wonderfully student Macbeth. But anyway, in that, the director's idea was that Banquo's ghost should look like a person whose skin had just been stripped off them. So he should just be covered in blood. And for those who haven't worked with fake blood, a typical recipe is golden syrup, or something a bit like golden syrup, mixed with some kind of red colouring. And I remember this poor guy, his name was Paddy Oldham. He had to be covered from head to toe. He was wearing a tiny little pair of Y-fronts and then covered from head to toe in this stuff. And to this day, the smell of sort of syrup makes me want to gag. Have you ever had a major stage fake blood part?
I have. I a long time ago, I played Coriolanus, and there was a scene where I had to come out of... There's the sequence where he goes into Coriolis single-handed and slaughters everyone and comes out.
Right.
And I was literally covered. And for the rest of the production, rest of the evening, I was stained, it looked like I had a bad tan, you know what I mean? Like an orange. I was slightly orange. No matter how much they washed it off.
It stains. It stains.
And it was one night where Finbar Lynch, wonderful actor.
Oh, wonderful Finbar Lynch.
Oh, brilliant. He was playing Tullus Orphidius, and we had this huge fight.
Yeah.
And one night, Finbar kicked me in the face accidentally during our fight. There was this bit where he had to kick, and I had to put my hand in front. It makes a nice noise, and then my head flung back, and he went driving right through my hand, and whacked my nose with his foot, and my nose just exploded, and there was real blood coming out. But nobody knew, because I was covered in blood already, so they just assumed it was all part of the thing. And
did you know? Were you aware that there was blood coming from your nose?
I knew. I was like, I'm in trouble. I thought it was broken. It wasn't in the end. But my lip, my nose kind of went for the rest, and my lip so suddenly kind of Coriolanus suddenly talking like this, you know.
Not so badass.
Yeah.
And that's so funny. Now that you've mentioned it, I remember, even though I feel like I know you very well already, Toby, I always, before I do these, I do a little bit of research. I'm like, is there anything I don't know about this person that I should, be in the know about? And actually, I remember seeing an image of your Coriolanus shirt. I think the RSC has it in they must have an exhibition of old costumes, of sort of quite notorious costumes. So the Richard the Third... My brain's gone blank. Who was the one who did the spider?
Oh, Anthony Sher.
The Anthony Sher, that's it. Yeah. The Anthony Sher Richard III costume is there. And yes, your bloody Coriolanus shirt is there.
Still dyed pink.
From
that dye.
Covered in blood. I feel like I will have to get Finbar Lynch onto this at some point, because in the first series...
He's the most wonderful actor.
Yeah, I talked to Mark Bonner and we were laughing about Finbar Lynch. And now you've mentioned Finbar Lynch, so... We just got to give the world what it wants and hear Finbar Lynch talk as well.
Love him.
I've just realised that you might have cursed my podcast by doing Macbeth.
I hope not. I don't think so. I don't believe any of that. Maybe I'll curse myself. Who knows?
You're like, God, it explains so much.
It's been most unwise. Why did I do it? I could have done anything.
I remember when I first asked you to do this, you said, oh, does it have to be something I've done? And I said, no, absolutely not. If it had to be something you'd done, what's your favourite speech that you have performed?
Oh.
What's one you remember very fondly?
It's so boring, but I do think I did Hamlet a long time ago, and I do think that those speeches, really, they are so fantastic.
Where was your Hamlet?
I did it at the RSC.
Tick.
I did really enjoy those speeches, and the problem is they're like a double-edged sword, because a lot of people know them.
Yeah,
that's more cursed in a way than I think this one is very cursed because it's done so often. These plays are done to death. You know what I mean? And so it's very difficult.
Yeah.
I personally think, controversially,
go on,
that there should be a moratorium on doing these plays. Give them a rest, put them to bed for a decade, and then let's have a look on. It's a wish. I would kind of wish we could do that, because I think we've come so far away from what they, and I do think that they have something to say. They still have something to say to us, these plays. They are very,
completely,
like Greek plays do.
Yeah.
They have something essential, and they're very important to us. And they lose it somehow. I think they've lost a lot of that, and I think we need to maybe just put them to bed for a while. Obviously, we can't. The RSC it functions entirely on the fact.
Of course,
that
I had forgotten about the RSC and the Globe.
And the Globe or whatever, like, what would they do? It's like, put it in mothballs for 10 years, and then, But I just wish they could. I mean, also, I think, like, there's quite a lot of plays I'd like to do. I think some Chekhov plays as well need to be put in the cupboard for a while, and just let's dust them off. It's hard for audiences to come to them fresh, because they already have so many preconceived notions of these things.
Are we worse off? Because when we're in the industry, we have so many friends in shows that we have to go and see, or, so many people, things that are meant to be brilliant, and like, you're meant to go and check out this, that does your average Joe, your average normal human being who's not trying to do this crazy thing, actually still get huge joy from Hamlet and Macbeth, because they don't see it on an annual basis, whereas we sometimes do end up having to watch it almost once a year because there's a new Hamlet, and it's another friend, someone's playing Horatio, so we'd better go and watch it.
Yeah, no, I think that is really tough.
I mean, on that note, would you read it for us?
Oh gosh.
After our complaining about hearing too much Shakespeare, what I would love is to hear some more Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Thank you, Toby. Yeah.
I may make a mistake, so...
That's entirely all right.
If I do, I'll just carry on as if I had.
Perfect.
Okay. Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? I see thee yet, in form as palpable as this which now I draw. Thou marshalledst me the way that I was going, and such an instrument I was to use. Mine eyes are made the fools of the other senses, or else worth all the rest. I see thee still, and on thy blade and dudgeon gouts of blood, which was not so before. There's no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes. Now, o'er the one half-world, nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings, and withered murder alarmed by his sentinel, the wolf, whose howls his watch. Thus with his stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides, towards his design moves like a ghost. Thou sure and firm set earth, hear not my steps, which way they walk, for fear thy very stones prate of my whereabout, and take the present horror from the time which now suits with it. Whilst I threat, he lives. Words to the heat of deeds too cold breath gives. I go, and it is done. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell.
Fabulous. I think what people don't appreciate sometimes as well is how lovely it is to say those words.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it is such beautiful language. But I mean, it also has this sort of... It's interesting that the meter and everything does have this inevitable kind of... It feels like it's part of the kind of like he's being drawn. He's not in control of his destiny. He is being drawn on. And even though he knows what he's doing, he can't stop himself from doing it. It has this...
Enjambment is not just a GCSE English Lit essay point, like it is true. It makes an actor feel like there's no stopping, like
Yeah.
you're constantly carried into the next line and into the next line.
And it is it is a moment of stillness. It is a moment. I mean, I think it's this kind of moment of like it's nighttime, and this is when bad shit happens, and I'm part of this whole thing. I am part of this, and I know what's going on. And the bell, when it rings, that thing of like going, it invites me, it calls me.
Yeah, what a phrase.
Yeah, it invites me. And then that thing of like, I cannot stop what is going on.
Yeah. Brill. Thank you so much, Toby.
You're more than welcome. You're more than welcome. Thank you for
This has been a
asking me
joy.
that.
I've just been smiling from beginning to end.
Good.
Hear Me Out is a Lucy Eaton Productions podcast. Music composed by Tristram Kay and artwork by Rebecca Bright. Our heartfelt thanks to the estates and license holders that allow us to read our guests' speech choices. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please subscribe, rate and review. You can follow us on social media at Pod Hear Me Out and enjoy visual clips of the interviews on our YouTube channel. Finally, if you would like to support Hear Me Out, go ahead and click the Patreon link at the bottom of the episode bios.